So why is taste more important than style? This is super important for getting jobs, I think, because there's there's so many different. I guess if you want to work in the entertainment industry on like different IPs, like the Avengers or Moana or whatever, I think there's too much of a focus on what your style is in art school in general. I mean, a lot of people talk about this. You might have heard about this from other people, but it's your style. I think should be how you present yourself. It's like the way that you're presenting your art. Okay, but I think what your taste is in terms of subject matter and like what you have to say is more important for an art director to that would look at your portfolio and hire you based off of that. Like, does your taste line up with their taste? Okay, so I have, if that's confusing, I have a slide like just defining it. So what I think style and taste is. So like the style being the way that you render your textures and the realism overall of your shapes and all that, versus the taste is kind of the subject matter mostly, and also the design a lot. There's like a design taste that I think you can identify with a lot of people, and just the overall feeling. Okay, so here's some examples of that. Which one is your is your taste? These are very different tastes. Okay, Pacific Rim is like the most outrageous mech, hilarious design that they can think of, and it's fun and hilarious, but also ridiculous and huge. And then there's Chappie, which is this movie about this little super believable robot. Where he's like not only on a scale, he's like the same size as a guy, but you could feel that this is a functional thing, and it's like totally like I could see that walking around. It's so grounded and so realistic in a lot of ways. Not to say that this isn't realistic in terms of the way it looks, right? The style of it is very realistic, but the taste is and to me is totally opposite ends of the spectrum. Okay, so here's another example: World of Warcraft. Um, this is interesting, I think, because there was like this World of Warcraft property, and they made it into this totally different, realistic rendered movie, right? Which apparently was terrible. I didn't see it. I also did not play World of Warcraft very much, the game, so I apologize if I get something wrong. But I think this was a like a marketing type illustration, basically. And what's interesting is this is like a totally different style, right? Like the way this is rendered. This was a painting, so they didn't try to render like the exact texture of the hair. The style of this is like a bit more quote unquote concept arty, I guess, where the textures are sort of stylized. It's also a very Blizzard style in that everything's chunky and a bit silly, but also in a very fun way, where it's like this armor plate is absolutely preposterous in its like size and the way it's broken up and the shapes of it. But what's interesting is I think this is, even though it's a totally different style in terms of how it's rendered, like how it's presented, right? Like it's super realistic, and you know the each hair is there, and the materials are believable. But the taste isn't, to me, isn't that far off. It's actually a very similar taste. And by what I mean by that is, if you like this, if you like huge orcs with ridiculously big, chunky armor, that's a bit silly but fun because it's silly. That's like what your taste is. So if you had like a portfolio of a lot of this taste, that might fit you into like what the type of stuff that Blizzard does. Does that make sense? So it's like, again, just totally different styles, but I think a similar taste. And the reason I think the taste aspect is more important is because there's so many examples of awesome properties and IPs where you have such a wide variety of style, of artists, totally different artists that work on the same property. And I think that's because of their taste. Okay. So as an example, this is John Howe, who I think he was doing like Lord of the Rings illustrations, and kind of before the movies were ever made. And I think the Peter Jackson took him, or like reached out to him, because his stuff was so iconic as what the Lord of the Rings looks like. Okay, and then he hired him onto the Lord of the Rings movies. Um, but what's really interesting is like he has such a specific style, John Howe, where it's like if I see any of these, I know immediately it's a John Howe painting and drawing. Like he's got this like really cool, I don't know, what would you call that? It's like a almost watercolory, but also some graphite style. And so all the negative space is really interesting in a way because it's got this like washy feel. Um, so that's like such a specific style. But what's interesting is his taste lined up exactly with what I guess Peter Jackson wanted with the taste of the Lord of the Rings. And what I mean by that is look how it's like very realistic in a way. It's much more grounded than the World of Warcraft stuff, even though this is like it's stylized in that it's cartoonish a little bit. Like these faces aren't super realistic, but the taste of them, the way they feel a bit darker than the World of Warcraft stuff, and like a bit more sinister. Like I can kind of feel the personality behind this guy in that it's like just all the little details that make up his personality. I think that taste lined up exactly with like this. It's like slightly stylized, slightly cartoonish, right? But it's also very grounded and realistic in that not the style again, but the feel of it. Like you can, this guy feels evil. Does that kind of make sense? It's the same with Star Wars, by the way. Ralph McQuarrie, who did uh, the original. I think this might have been actually the very first concept art ever for Star Wars, which is crazy because it looks. I mean, these guys look exactly like that in the final product, almost. I mean, a bit different, but the feel of it is exactly spot on, even the like environment and everything. And then all this stuff. I think this was the first illustration of Darth Vader, which is crazy how similar that ended up being in the final product. And I think that's because he has his own style. These are Ralph McQuarrie paintings. I can tell that by the rendering type. But his taste of these huge, iconic, good versus evil, black and red, and these shapes being super simple and graphic. That's his like design taste. That was just spot on for what I guess George Lucas wanted Star Wars to be. Does that kind of make sense? So if you have like a portfolio of let's say of orcs, okay, you can make them any style that you want, kind of within reason. But I think what a lot of people will respond to, art directors included, is what your taste feels like. Okay, that's like the emotional thing that makes them think, oh, I know what this person was trying to say. That's the kind of art I want on my project. And then the last example of this, I love this example. Norman Rockwell, I talked about him before, versus J.C. Leyendecker. I think they both, I just saw this on Twitter, so if someone heard about this, maybe. So my apologies. But I think they both had to do, at some point in their careers, they both had to depict like the graduate, the fresh-faced graduate who is going to make their way in the world. And what's really interesting is there's a totally different style, right? J.C. Leyendecker's style is so over the top and insane and cool and stylized. And Norman Rockwell's style is so much more grounded, like the rendering of it. But look how different their taste is. It's like the exact opposite. I would hire one of them to work on my IP, which I don't have, but if I ever were an art director, I would hire them based on their taste, not on how the end product looks. I mean, in a way, I would kind of get the feeling, depending on what it's needed, I might look at their style a little bit, but I think the more important thing is like which feeling that they have.